Hi everyone, in this video we'll be creating the following button. Using the custom shaped volumes package, we'll determine what procedural foliage is allowed to stay and which should disappear. I'm going to be going over what I did to create this. This is a nice starting point. You'll probably want to make some changes to it, but yeah, you can see it in action. So we have two foliage types, the headset, virtual reality headsets, and the cubes. And I'm using the custom shaped volume to determine what is allowed to stay. Now, first, if you're wondering how do I get these procedural foliage things, now that's a different tutorial, but you have to go into your editor settings and enable procedural foliage. So if you look for foliage, you can see procedural foliage, and that allows this new actor that you can drag in and then spawn foliage with. Not the point of this tutorial. So first thing I did was duplicate the BP duplicate me in the custom volumes, which I accidentally moved into the foliage, I guess. So I've duplicated the BP duplicate me volume, and then in there I didn't really do anything. All I did was add a procedural foliage volume, so it has this little icon next to it, the foliage, and I made that instance editable, and I added an ignore me, and that will basically mean that say we delete all of this and we regenerate, resimulate, let that happen for a while, and when I say ignore me, then as you expect it is ignored in the process, and this foliage isn't updated, only the ones that we indicated here. So then I did that, and now I had the 4 spawners in here, and I dragged in my volumes and I set up the references. So this volume references this, and this custom shape spline references this volume, etc, etc. You get the point. Next, I created an editor utility widget. Now maybe you can't if you're on a certain version of Unreal, and then you can go to editor utility and editor scripting utilities and sequence scripting. You have to turn it on for it to show up at all. I didn't even need to turn it on. I don't need the extra functions. And then in editor utilities you can create an editor utility widget, which is this button. So when we go in there, there's a button with text that does nothing, and then another text block. Not really that relevant. The relevant part is what happens when we click that button. So here we reset some states. I'll come back to that later. So what I do is I get the selected actors and I check if anything is selected. If nothing is selected, then I say update the text to select foliage, and if something is selected, I check if we selected the instance foliage actor, and I promote, so I cast to instance foliage actor, and then I promote that to a variable, and this variable I also reset on button clicked, so I make sure that if you have something else selected, that it's reset first. So this is the instance foliage actor, that's what that's called. So after that, I update the text. Not really that relevant, I'm not going to mention that anymore from now on, but yeah, if you see set text, it's the text that's below the, it's this text that says in progress or processing or done. So then I have a get all actors of class, and that's the BP foliage volume. So that's the one that we just created here. That's the custom shaped volume. Get all of those. And I also add a custom event here, and I called it repeat. After that, I do get foliage child, which is an integer. And then I get the amount of children. So how many children does the instance foliage actor have? And if we go to this example, that answer is 2, because it has the cubes, that's a child component, and it has the headset, that's also a child component. And the class is instance static mesh, so instance static mesh component, the bottom one. Then I do the, so I set the amount, I get the foliage child, so that's the one that we just set to 0 over here. And then I set that component to a variable, the instance mesh component, which I also reset when a button is clicked, but that's not really necessary per se, but yeah, I like to reset those variables. So I have a next foliage piece event that goes into this. So once we've done all the work for this foliage, we'll go to the next one. And I have array elements and the instance count. So the array element, let me have a look here. The array element is for the custom shaped volumes. So I'm gonna go over them one by one. Also, where do I set that to 0? Oh, here. So yeah, I set the array element to 0. Then above here I have a next volume, so that you get the array element, do a +1, and then in this branch I check if the array element is bigger than the length. You can do length -1, but I have an is valid here, so if it's not valid it will also continue. So we'll go back to the true and false here. So we get the array element, so we get the spline volume, and then we get the spline of that volume and save it as a spline reference. Then we check if ignore me is true. If ignore me is true, we go to the next volume, which is right here at the top, what I just covered. So next volume, it checks the next volume and goes over all of these steps again. And let's go. If it is false, so if we should continue, then we use the instance count that we checked here earlier. We checked get the instance count of the foliage child. So in this case, how many cubes are there, or how many headsets are there. So using that, I do a for loop. So for each of them, we're gonna do a little check. Now this is the best that I could come up with in this amount of time. So I get the instance transform of the instance static mesh component. Which is that? So that's the, oh yeah, so we get the instance, so we get that specific cube or headset, and we get their instance. I enabled world space, which is important because you want to check world space. Now what is it being compared to? First I break it, the transform, and then I compare it to the procedural foliage reference. What is that? Well, that's the one that's referenced. So if we click this one, procedural foliage reference, that is this square. So we're checking, basically, first we're doing a general check, is this foliage even in this procedural volume? Because we don't want to update things from this volume when we're doing the check in this volume. And there's no real way to check, because this is just instance static meshes, there's no real way to check, are these meshes associated with this volume or that volume? So first we do a check, are they inside the procedural foliage referenced in the custom shaped volume? So we get the actor bounds, and then the origin goes into the, then we do a is point in box to check if the instance transform is inside of a box. Now what I did was I added the scale to the box extent, kind of just to add that to it a little bit. And because when I did not do that, I had instances where, let's have a look, where maybe this cube, its center point was just a little bit over the edge, so not counted as inside the box, and then it would break the, or it wouldn't break, but it wouldn't be considered for the calculation. So this would be false and nothing would happen. And you know, if it's inside the box, we want something to happen. So I added the scale as an additional over here. Next, this is basically just copied from the PP spline volume. So it's a sphere traced by channel. The start point is the transform of the instance. So it's getting one of these cubes, and the start point is its location in the world, and the end point is the closest point on the spline. So it's going to do a trace. That trace will give a hit result. We check the physics material, are we outside or inside? If we're outside, we add it to the array of things to delete, the delete arrays. Integer with arrays, yeah, an integer array with things to delete, which I also clear when the button is pressed in this at start. I draw a debug box, which is optional. I just had that issue where things would stay on the edge and I was wondering, are they even marked? Okay, going back. So if you're done with the BP foliage volumes and either it's not valid, which is probably going to be the case, or the array element has become bigger than the amount of custom shapes, then we continue to the actual deleting part. So we get the delete arrays and we do a for each loop, and then we remove the instance using the instance mesh component as a reference. So we're basically just deleting. Now this is a bit of a weird part because over here sometimes it fails. So that's a little bit frustrating. So you'll get instances where they'll just stick around. So I do a little check after the remove instance. Did it succeed or did it fail? If it fails, I set this variable to true, fail state triggered. And then after the deleting is done, we repeat the process if the fail state is triggered. So branch fail state triggered, okay, clear the array of delete, set fail state to false again, do a little delay, and then I update the text, and then I do repeat, which is what we created earlier. It's like at the top, and we go over all the volumes again. And basically it's repeated until fail state triggered is false, and then we are done. So I update the text, and that's that. But first I do a check, get foliage child and amount of children. So what's that? Get foliage child is what we set here. The amount of children is how many different types of foliage are part of this foliage volume. So we've also set that in here in the process. And if it is not equal to the amount of children, then we repeat the entire thing again with the next foliage child. So I get the foliage child plus 1, set the foliage child, do a little delay, give the system some time, and then next foliage piece, which brings us back to here. And then it goes over everything again. I hope that made sense. Long story. If you have any questions, make sure to join the Discord. Let's see it in action one more time. And I want everyone included. Now the whole process probably makes a little bit more sense. I'm going to delete everything and simulate. And then press the foliage volume. I have to select the foliage first, of course. So now you can see it's going over everything, it's deleting it step by step, it's doing multiple iterations because sometimes things are stuck inside. And now it's done. Now something to keep in mind is that this does mess with the system a little bit. So if we say resimulate this, sometimes, I don't know if this is the foliage thing or something else, but I had instances where if I do resimulate, it would add instances in other volumes as well. So that's a little bit frustrating. So yes, see, it just moved the things from here to over here. It gets a little confused at times. So that's why I suggest you keep this for a little bit towards the end of the process, and otherwise just delete the entire thing, resimulate, and then rerun the process, and that's going to be the fastest way to do this. Now this is just a start. Of course you can easily expand on this. If the performance is bad for you, disable visualization. So turn off the for duration, remove the debug box. I leave that on because I like to see what's going on, but it does take a hit on performance. We can do like a little comparison. So stat FPS, and let's select it. And let's remove it. As you can see, it dropped to like 20 for a second, but it stayed pretty stable after. And if we turn that off, so disconnect, none, and we go back, simulate, select it. As you can see, now there's barely any performance impact. You just see things being deleted. Okay, I think I'll stick with that. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for asking this question in the Discord. It was a very nice, interesting challenge, and I had a lot of fun doing this actually. So yeah, please leave a like, subscribe, yada yada yada. You know the deal. Okay, bye bye. I'll see you in the next one.